Thank you for joining us. In this video, we're going to be discussing a method of analysis known as the economics of one unit. In this video, we're going to really discuss some of the basics, go over what the economics of one unit is, some of the different elements of that, just kind of establish some of the different foundational elements, of course. And then in the next video, we're going to go through some calculations. So we're going to show you how to actually do an economics of one unit analysis. We'll keep things fairly basic, but the whole idea is that you'll be able to take that and then apply that into your particular business idea. So first, what is the economics of one unit? It's a simple analysis designed to determine what we call financial feasibility. And so usually what we have here is we have a particular business idea that we haven't necessarily vetted yet, right? We haven't determined if it's viable, but we're exploring it. And so one of the first things that we can do is a brief kind of financial feasibility, meaning we're trying to figure out if we can actually make any money off this idea, because obviously in business, that's a pretty important thing, to make a little bit of money to make sure that you can cover your costs at least. So that's what we're really doing. Now, with this type of financial feasibility, we're looking specifically at what we call variable costs. Now, just real quick, variable costs are costs that vary with production. So as I produce and sell more of something, I incur more of these costs. Let me give you a brief example. If you were to run a coffee shop, coffee shops have a number of different costs, like all businesses, but they have quite a few variable costs. And so if I sell, for example, coffee, I incur costs associated with making coffee. And so the more coffee I sell, the more money I spend on things like coffee beans, the more money I spend on cups and sugar and all of those different things that go into making coffee, right? If I don't sell any coffee, I don't incur any of those costs. But the more coffee that I sell, those costs also go up. So doing the economics of one unit helps us set a price that considers those costs so we don't lose money in the short term or the long term. Now you can compare that to what we call fixed costs, which fixed costs, of course, do not vary with production. And so, for example, in our coffee shop, if we pay rent, that's not going to vary with coffee that we sell. So regardless if we sell no coffee, we still have to pay rent. Or if we sell 1,000 cups of coffee, we still pay the same rent. And so these ones do not vary with production. But we're not going to use these or consider these, at least for the purpose of the economics of one unit. We're solely looking at the variable cost, everything that goes into selling a particular item. Remember, this is a preliminary financial feasibility. We can do other things later on once we at least kind of establish the idea has some viability. We can put it through additional tests to make sure that it can hold up, essentially. So that's kind of the main point. So the big thing with the one unit, the one unit does not necessarily mean simply one of something. That's a very, very common belief. So that's not necessarily the case. It certainly can, but it does not have to. So for example, if you are a wholesaler, so a business that purchases goods from a manufacturer and then sells them to a retailer, you're not going to buy simply one thing, right? So, any product, you're not going to buy one of that and sell it to a retailer, because wholesalers make a lot of their money by buying things in bulk and selling them in large quantities, but also they have storage facilities so they can store things and sell them, buy a bulk of something and then sell smaller quantities to a retailer. But they're not going to sell one of something, right? Like one box of pens. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So the one unit for a wholesaler may look different. A one unit for a wholesaler could be maybe 12 dozen, right? So it's not just one actual item, but that could be their one unit. So one unit for a wholesaler is 12 dozen of something. Or for a manufacturer, right? Manufacturers obviously sell things to wholesalers, probably in much larger quantities. So maybe this could be even more than that, right? One unit could be a pallet, So it just really depends. Now, if you're a retailer, right, if you're a coffee shop, then your 1 unit might be 1 cup of coffee. Or if you're a sandwich shop, it could be 1 sandwich. Or if you're a kind of a hair salon, it could be 1 haircut. So service firms and retailers, typically the denomination is actually 1 item, but wholesalers and manufacturers, it doesn't necessarily have to be 1. The important thing is that you're just consistent. And so if you're going to price your products based upon 1 unit being 12 dozen of something, then you want to consider costs associated with 12 dozen of something. You want to make sure that you're consistent. I hope that makes sense. So that's important. Make sure that you spend some good time in figuring out what your 1 unit is, because it will affect the calculations and how you allocate costs. If you don't do that right, nothing else that we do is going to matter. So make sure that you spend some time and get that down and make sure that it's accurate. When we're doing the actual analysis, there's a couple of things that we're going to need and then you'll have to figure out. The first thing is going to be a selling price. And we're going to go with selling price per unit. This is very important because obviously we want to figure out what is going to be left over after we subtract all of our different costs. The next thing we're going to need are our variable costs. And there are 3 different types of variable costs that we're going to look at, 3 general categories of variable costs. The first thing we're going to look at is our direct materials. Direct materials are all of the materials, items, ingredients that directly go into the creation of a good or offering a service. These are absolutely necessary. The great way to figure out if it's a direct material, if you did not have it, you would not be able to provide the good or the service. That's a great way to look at it. And so we're going to look at all of our direct materials, specifically though, per unit. And so we might, let's say making coffee, we're going to buy a bulk of coffee beans, but how much does it cost us on 1 cup of coffee? So we're definitely going to need to do some division, of course. The next thing we're going to look at is our direct labor, and obviously on a per unit basis as well. And so this is the manpower that is needed to produce the good or offer the service. So once again, sticking with our example of a coffee shop, the barista, the individual who is making the coffee, their time. And so once again, we're going to have to do a little bit of division because they're not going to spend a whole hour making that. If we pay them $8 an hour, we're not going to give them $8 for 1 cup of coffee. We're going to have to figure out how much time do they spend, figure out what their hourly wage is, and ultimately what that looks like. The next thing we're going to look at are our other variable costs. And these are also items that vary based upon what we sell, right? The number of units, number of goods or services that we actually offer. So they do vary with production, but they don't fit nice and neatly into direct materials or direct labor per se. And so these can include things like shipping, can include packaging, as well as sales commission if you do essentially pay people to sell products. And so they obviously make more money for every unit sold, so you do have to consider that in our economics of 1 unit analysis. So if you don't do those things, if you don't ship products, if you don't have to package them to ship them, and if you don't offer sales commissions, we don't have to consider it. But some businesses do, and so you would have to consider those particular things there. So this is what we're going to need. When we get through all this, we're going to figure out what our gross profit per unit is, or gross profit margin per unit, and we're also going to figure out what our contribution margin per unit is utilizing these pieces of information. Okay, so hopefully that at least clarifies a little bit about what we're doing, what the economics of 1 unit analysis is. In the next video, we'll go through the calculations very briefly. We won't spend a whole lot of time, but I just want to make sure that you have a good idea on how to do it so that once again, you can take that information and then replicate it on your own particular business idea. So hopefully that clarifies. If you have any questions, feel free to post a comment in the box below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can. Other than that, thank you for watching. Have a great rest of the day.